that in a sense, this to me is about aging in community. I'm going to do a presentation called Walking the Talk. This is a presentation that focuses on an experience I had with being diagnosed with retinal cancer. And I created handouts which are available if you contact me at my by phone, and you can find my phone number in the directory. So what's Walking the Talk about? Well, over the last 5 years, almost 6 now, I have offered over 40 programs, mostly associated with advanced medical directives, mortality, and the challenges that are associated with it. And I've presented programs on how to make the most of a 911 call, anticipating COVID, how to have the conversation, taking charge at the end of life, and a whole series called Being Mortal Mondays. And the premise of Being Mortal Mondays was quite focused on the work of Atul Gawande, who wrote the book Being Mortal. The message in this is that when we are faced with a challenging, possibly life-threatening medical situation, we oftentimes freeze up, or we don't make the best decisions that we could. And there were 3 elements that I've presented over and over again to the folks here at East Hampton and at Northampton. And it's that when we get frightened, and we can call this an existential anxiety because we're worried about our existence, we will tend towards becoming very dependent on doctors, or we will deny and pretend this isn't really happening to us, or we will fight. And you've probably heard people in your life say, when someone was diagnosed with cancer, oh, he's a strong one, he's going to fight it. Well, these are ways we enact emotions which are associated with our fear. And because I've had an abiding interest in this for the better part of 50 years, I felt it was important to try to help people get to the point where they can cope more effectively and make better decisions as they go through the process of dealing with an illness. And some would say, I think, in the past that I have probably annoyed them by pressing hard for people to think about the choices they want and think about the things that they would like to have at the end of their life. So it happened to me. I was diagnosed with retinal cancer, and I want to tell you the story of that because I have been challenged to do what I've urged you to do. I have been challenged to make sure that I touch all the bases that I used to ask all of you to touch. And as a result of that, I want to tell you about my experience with it and both my successes and some significant lapses. There were 2 that I will tell you about that occurred in the course of my dealing with the diagnosis and dealing with the treatment. I want to emphasize this does not have to be your journey. I am not saying that this is the way to go. I'm simply telling you my story about my diagnosis, and I am going to do it in probably the largest organ recital you ever heard. We talk about organ recitals here a lot because people are always saying, oh, this is wrong with me, or that's not doing so well. So I'm going to tell you what happened with my eye. My story begins 25 years ago. I was seeing an optometrist who told me I needed to go see a specialist at Mass Eye and Ear because he saw something strange on my retina. And what it was, in layman's terms, looked like a freckle on my retina. Its formal name is a nevus. I have no idea why that is, and so I went to see this very famous physician at Mass Eye and Ear. There was about 15 different languages being spoken in the waiting area. And he told me that indeed I did have this freckle, and they would watch it, they would monitor it regularly from now on. And that meant at first that every 3 months I went there and they took photographs of it and they measured it and they did various tests to see if it was stable or it was changing. When it changes, it will change into a retinal melanoma, which is a cancer on the surface of the retina. So eventually, after about 2 years of that, we went to a yearly exam, and I've had the yearly exam for almost 23 years. There's a lesson here, and the lesson is do the follow-up necessary for the monitoring of whatever concern there is, because if you don't, and it gets ahead of you, it can be much more disastrous. So there were some problems around 2020 when COVID occurred, and I was delayed some in having my exams, but I had them, and everyone said, oh, everything's fine. This looks very old. It looks very settled. It practically looks like it's got cobwebs on it. We don't think anything's going to happen to this. But I continued to do the yearly exams. Around March of this last year, I noticed something funny in my left eye. If any of you run or operate computers and see when something's downloading, you'll see a little thing that chases its tail that goes round and round. I was seeing that right here. And I couldn't get an appointment with an optometrist, and I couldn't get one. And I finally, on the 9th of May, the day before my birthday, I walked into an optometrist office that I had gone to, and I said, I need an appointment, and I need it now. They gave me an appointment the next day, which also happened to be my birthday. It was a gift. So the optometrist looked at it, and she said, at the end of the exam, she said, you need to go see a retinal specialist on Monday. And I knew something was up. And I called the retinal specialist, and she said, oh yes, the staff said, oh yes, we understand that there's a possible problem. The optometrist has faxed a letter to us, called to make sure that the letter has been received, and all of this suggested to me, this is important, really important. So the next thing I did was I went to the retina specialist, and she sent me to Boston saying, I'm really glad you came in. You need to go to Boston right away to Mass Eye and Ear. I knew what she was telling me. I knew that this had become an active melanoma. It needed to be confirmed, but the nonverbal read from the doctors, both the optometrist and the retinal specialist, was, this is bad, you got to get in there and get there soon. So we know what healthcare is like today. The retinal specialist in Springfield had me an appointment with Mass Eye and Ear in 5 days. That tells you something, because you don't get appointments like that very easily. And so I had that appointment on June 4th. So it was the 10th of May and the 4th of June, I'd obtained the necessary diagnosis, and it was then time to go to work. So sometimes the behavior of your provider, this is the lesson here, sometimes the behavior of your provider can be the thing that tells you what's really going on. What we decided to do, I'm speaking my wife Carol and me, was we had a family Zoom after the appointment on the 4th of June at Mass Eye and Ear. And we had our 3 sons on the call, and we told them what the story was and that there were 2 choices that we had. One was radiation, and the second was something called brachytherapy. And the radiation treatment was a very interesting treatment. I would have to go to Jacksonville, Florida for 2 weeks and have treatment every day with a proton beam generator. What that does is it generates a beam of protons, but this has a very, very rapid decay rate as a function of distance. So if this is the back of my eye and this is my brain, which we don't want radiated, then we have to have a very rapid decay rate for the proton beam. So to do that, I could do that, but I have to go in the end of June for 2 weeks to Jacksonville, Florida. That was not exciting as a direction. The thing that was appealing is that this kind of radiation is quite non-invasive, although not entirely without its side effects. So the second approach was offered to me to begin on the 24th of June. And this particular approach involved something called brachytherapy. Here's what happens. This is the back of my eye. They create a gold cup that exactly fits the contour of the back of my eye. And in that gold cup are glued radioactive isotopes. Why do they do this? The gold cup prevents any radiation from going into my brain and focuses all that radiation on the melanoma, which is right here. So it's an amazing technical achievement that they can do this. And so that would be installed on the 24th of June, and it would stay in place until the 27th of June, and it would be removed, and that's the end of the treatment. There's no treatment after that. Excuse me. So because of the expense and because of the distance and because of the fact that we could get this done and get it over with, we opted for the surgery, the brachytherapy as it's called. And and so we said to our sons, you figure out, we'd like your help during this. You figure out how to help us as we go through this process of the surgery. And the surgery would be on the 24th of June, it would be installed. On the 27th, I would wear, believe it or not, a lead eye patch for 4 days. I couldn't sleep in the same bed with anybody. And then on the 27th, it would be removed. And so we turned our boys loose on it. They're not exactly boys, of course, they're in their 50s now. But that was the first part. We set that up. The second thing that we did after that was we had to interact with 3 different parts of departments at Mass Eye and Ear. One was the surgery, the second was radiation, and the third department was anesthesia. And in each case, they had a very good arrangement, a very good organization, and you should look for this if you are faced with this. They had a point person who was the interface between me and the surgical team. They had a point person between me and an anesthesia team, and they had a point person also for the radiation. And so I needed to interact with each of them, and I had a number and I had an email, and I could interact with them at any time with any questions. So this made it very easy. Each surgeon had their own, what was called a pod at Mass Eye and Ear. So their whole staff would be right there. There would be another pod for another surgeon, and so on. So the first thing we did was when we, and I say we because I included Carol in all my negotiations, because 4 ears are better than 2, and there's good chance that you could make a mistake. So the surgical nurse was named Brianna, and she was terrific. And I have to say, she was much more personable than the surgeon, who had good hands, but was not as personable. So we said, what if we do anything? What if we don't do anything? We just let this go. And what we're doing is testing the limits of what the various technique is going to be and how it's going to affect. And Brianna's instant response was, you don't want to do that. But then she said, you have 20/20 vision. There's no reason for you to undertake the removal of the eye. But if you do nothing, you're going to have to remove the eye. And so we asked what the side effects were, and then we asked the cure rates. It turns out the cure rate for both the surgery or the radiation is 95%. That's a nice figure. We like that. She sent us documents when we had questions about various aspects of the process. She emailed us documents that we could read to further understand it. We asked what the best ways to communicate were, and we got answers to that. Where to stay in Boston, because after the first surgery on the 24th of June, I had to stay overnight for an early morning surgical exam the next day to evaluate how the surgery had gone. So what do? They actually take this little gold cup I was talking about, and they suture it directly behind where the melanoma is. My little gold cup, I'm using my hand, but my little gold cup was the size of a dime. And it's exactly positioned to fit over the area behind the melanoma and completely cover it with radiation. It's a pretty amazing process. And if you think about it, probably a lot of federal money went into supporting this research to make it possible for people to do this. And I'm saddened to know that much of that research on medical treatments has been delayed or canceled. So Brianna also asked if I would like a biopsy of the melanoma. And I immediately said, yes, I want one, because my way of dealing with this is I want to know everything I can about the possible future of my health based on what we do. And the biopsy would tell me what the possible metastasis is. That's spreading to other parts of the body. And in my particular case, the metastasis would be to my liver or lungs. And I'm 88, almost 88, and 5 years would make me 92, 93. And so I'm saying to myself, do I really want to live beyond that if I have a liver or lung thing? And I concluded I didn't. So it was even more important for me to know what the chances were that I might have a metastasis. So I opted for the biopsy. And I told the surgeon that if the biopsy showed that there was a good chance of my getting surgery, of getting a cancer in my lungs or my liver, I would not probably, this is speculative of course, but I would probably not choose to have any treatment of it. And to her credit, she remembered that and raised it several more times. There are two things. There's a thing this is where I made my first mistake. It's a very interesting one. When I was, where is it? When I came in, I brought this. This is my medical directives. And I brought it to my appointments. And I fully expect that the surgeon or the surgical team would ask for information on what my advanced medical directives would be. And I was fully prepared to discuss that with them. They never raised it. And I'm not quite sure why, but they didn't raise it. And so I didn't raise it myself. And I should have. I think that's really important that I talk to the doctor about what happens if something goes wrong in the surgery. What happens if something goes wrong in some way that is life-threatening to me. But it didn't happen, and the only thing I can think about is that maybe 10 or 15 years ago I had a hernia surgery, and the surgeon told me, if anything goes wrong and you arrest on the table, I'm going to resuscitate you. That's a condition of the surgery. And this was before I'd done any of this research on end-of-life planning. So I thought that was, I think that probably influenced me. I didn't want to have to get into a disagreement with the surgeon. I wanted this thing dealt with. And so I think I shrunk away a bit from actually addressing the issue of advanced medical directives. So that's my first mistake. And I think that was a little bit of my being a little too dependent and maybe in denial and too supplicant to the surgeon instead of taking my position and saying, look, I really want to be clear with you about this. So that ends the surgical team. Now I want to go to the anesthesia team. These actually were far less complex conversations than the surgical one, which had such a realm of information. And so I wanted to know what kind of anesthesia I was going to have, and they told me some weird name that I didn't understand, and it doesn't make a lot of sense. I asked about postoperative pain, and they talked about giving me oxycodone, which scared me because I didn't want to be addicted to oxy or anything else. I had another concern, and this is another thing that I have hectored people a lot about, which was intubation. I did not want to be intubated. I wanted to be, and so I called a friend who was a nurse anesthetist, very nice gentleman I know. And I said, you know, what's the options for me in this kind of surgery? And he said, well, I don't do this. I don't attend this kind of surgery at all, so I'm not absolutely sure. But he said the alternative to being intubated is high-flow oxygen, which is a mask that has oxygen and it allows you to breathe that way. And so I resolved I would discuss with the anesthesia nurse whether I could have high-flow oxygen rather than a tube in my throat. I didn't do it, and I don't know exactly why. I think it was, again, this sort of like a little bit of intimidation I experience when I'm talking with these people. And so when I woke up after the first surgery, I had a tickle in my throat. And it was because I had a tube down there that was breathing oxygen for me. And the tickling lasted about 10 minutes. So it was not exactly the worry that I had anticipated it might be. But I urge you to go on Netflix and watch a short documentary of about 22 minutes or there called Extremis, and it's a lot about intubation and extubation. Very, very important. So then the third came the radiation nurse, and I asked a number of questions, but I really didn't understand so much of it. And I knew it was the only way that this would work. It's pretty amazing to think they implant radiation for 3 days and take it out and you're treated. So I want to next talk about communication. I had this communication with the staff in these 3 areas, but then I thought, you know, I've really got to let people know here. I'm on the board of trustees, and I felt it was important, so I talked to Patrick. I reached out to Larry Hunt, who is the president of the board now, and true to the notion of aging in community, Larry said, well, do you need a ride to Boston? I'll drive you. This is the president of the board offering to take the better part of a day to just drive me down for an appointment. And that's aging in community, I think, with the board being members of this community as well. I told people on the lane what was going on our lane, which is Huckleberry Lane. And I met with the executive committee of the Resident Association, which I participate in as a board member. And in meeting with them, I had in the meantime discovered that there was a rumor going around, because I've been telling people about this, that I had rectal cancer. No, that's a pain in the butt, believe me. So it's, you know, by being open about this, people have a better knowledge of what your issues are and ways of being helpful to you. I've personally, my feeling is if I'm more open, I'm going to get more help. And if I'm more closed, I noticed that there were some people who approached me and they'd say, well, how are things going? They wouldn't say, how's your eye? How's your vision? What's developing? Now, some people don't like that. Some people prefer the privacy. I totally understand and respect that. But there's something to be said for the community knowing what's going on so they can be of help to you. So let's move up to talking about the time of surgery. So our sons got back to us and they cooked up a whole plan. And it was very moving to see what they did and how loving they were. Our son Craig, who lives in Brooklyn, took the train up on the 23rd of June, stayed overnight with us, drove us in for the surgery on the 24th. While I was having the surgery, he was out getting the prescriptions filled, getting dinner for us, because I hadn't had anything to eat since the night before, and it was like 3 in the afternoon when I got out of surgery. And he stayed with us at the hotel because we had to go in for an early appointment the next day. Then he drove us back on Wednesday, the 25th, to East Hampton, and we went from there. And he got on the train then and went back to New York to his job. Meanwhile, our son Eric is airborne from Hawaii, and he arrives on Thursday, the 26th. Meanwhile, I'm wearing this big black lead eye patch. And he arrives in the afternoon, having flown most of the night. And he ends up at our door, and he drives us in on Friday morning for the surgery, and then drives us to Maine later in that day, where our third son, Scott, has been, and he's prepared 6 days of meals, mowed the lawn, turned on the hot water, made the beds, and just made the place perfect for us. Each of them in their own way was an incredible gift to us in the things that they did. And I can't say enough about how wonderful that was. One of the things that I want to be sure to tell you about is that I wanted someone to be with Carol, my wife, through this whole process. And I wanted it to be one of the boys. And on the 23rd, when Craig came into Springfield, the first thing we did was we went to the bank and arranged to have new signature cards created for all of our accounts, which enabled Craig to become a signatory in case it was necessary for him to start writing checks or otherwise managing the accounts. It's a very important thing to do because if you don't have that, you as or your children cannot access any funds. And of course, at the time of something like this, it may be very important to access those funds. For example, if people needed to fly in, they needed money to do that, there would be money available through checks to be written or money to be transferred. And without Craig signing that, it couldn't happen. The second thing that we did was on the night of the 23rd, I sat Craig and Carol down and I said, these are my advanced medical directives. If something goes wrong in this surgery, this is what I want to review with you to do and to respond to. And I think this is a very important exercise. When Eric came, I had the exact same conversation with Eric and Carol. And in each of these cases, the intention was to make sure that they knew what could happen and what couldn't happen. There's a book in the handout, which you're welcome to ask me for, called Floating Feathers. Floating Feathers is the story of a physician who had a major fall off the roof of his house and was really severely injured. And Floating Feathers is a description of what it was like for him to be in intensive care and to be intubated and all of that. And he survived, but it was only because his wife was very, very aggressive in ensuring that he got the care that he wanted when he was, while he was in the hospital, because he wasn't able to make those choices. And I want to say that this is something that I think I have an even more dramatic example. A good friend of ours who was our former dentist, father went in for a routine colonoscopy and minor surgery. One of the sutures that was inserted into his colon broke. And as a result of that, he became septic and went into shock within 24 hours. They battled for 28 days with him in the intensive care unit on being intubated and his kidneys beginning to fail, and it was a horrible month. At the end of the month, they recognized they couldn't beat this infection and they let him pass. It's important to understand that even in minor operations or operations that seem to have little relationship to other major organ systems, it's important to understand that when that kind of a thing happens, you have to be prepared. And honestly, it's hard for us who are not physicians to be prepared, but it's important for us to be prepared in the form of talking with our relatives about what if something goes wrong, what do I want? So I think that's mentioned as one of the references at the end of the book. I mentioned to you earlier that in the course of my conversation, our time with Craig, we had him sign these documents. These are documents I'd been intending to have signed for a long time, but either I didn't have them or they were, it just didn't happen that we managed to pull off this minor thing. And that's very true. Many of you, I dare say, probably have documents that are not complete and that you keep saying, oh, I need to do this or I need to do that. I strongly urge you to go back and look at the documents you have and make sure they're up to date. Actually, as I went through my documents a little while ago, I discovered one page was missing that I needed to have in there. And so I've resolved to do that. But I discovered about 3 weeks ago and haven't done it. So I'm as guilty of this as anybody. So I also asked our sons when we were in appointments and they were accompanying us, I asked them to take notes, not Carol, so she could listen and they could take the notes and give us the notes afterwards, so we were sure that we had it. It's very important to have someone else with you. Very, very important, because there's a lot to absorb. It's emotional, it's unsettling, and it can be a problem. So if you don't remember things properly. So after all of this, what are the results of this? Well, there are several kinds. First of all, I had a huge amount of debris in my eye after the surgery, and it looked like a dust storm. There were black specks all over, called floaters. And that's all been taken care of. And my eye is better. I still have very minor double vision when I look hard to the left. So when I'm going out Florence Road, if I see two cars that look like the same car, I know it's a double vision thing. Other than that, my vision is pretty good. The results of the biopsy were very positive. I have a 96% chance of no metastasis for 5 years, and the doctors were practically dancing. They were so excited by this outcome. They said it couldn't be any better. I expect there will be future vision complications. They've told me within the next 1 to 2 years I will have some vision loss, and it's most likely due to the radiation affecting the retina, and some of it's stray radiation that didn't just focus on the melanoma. I notice now I have kind of weird white things that flicker up and disappear in this eye, and I think that may be, I don't know, I think that may be the retina beginning to demonstrate the effects of the radiation. I want to just finish up by saying a little bit of what my conclusions are. First of all, your body is yours. It's not the doctor's. And you're the one that has the right to say you can do this to me or you can't do it to me. And it's very important to remember that. Always ask what your options are. Ask doctors about conservative versus aggressive treatment. Is the treatment that's being proposed for you a conservative treatment, or is it an aggressive one? How do doctors relate themselves in terms of their treatment? Do they view themselves as conservative in how they approach conditions that they're asked to treat, or are they aggressive? Ask about the likelihood of cure and what the probabilities are. Ask about side effects, not only side effects from, say, surgery or radiation. Ask about side effects that are going to be long-term. Communicate often and clearly with family. When I did this, actually, I wrote a special letter to the grandchildren to explain to them in terms that I felt were hopefully reassuring to them, because that's part of my belief of how I have to care for my own family. Communicate with close friends, which I did. Discuss your directives with your medical professionals. I didn't do that as much as I should. And of course, review your medical directives with your family so that they can make the best decisions in your behalf should you not be able to. And I would like to just say that after this program, I had a number of people come up and say, I'd like to do a program on, or I'd like to help you with a program on, and I've got some ideas. I have suspended the Being Mortal Monday because of the eye surgery, and because I think I've said about all I can about being mortal. However, I would be open to hearing about people's ideas for programs, and I thank you very much for listening and paying attention to my presentation about my walking the talk. Thank you.